The room fell silent as the lawyer cleared his throat, reading from the late patriarch's will. Dark wood-paneled walls echoed with every syllable. To my beloved wife Judith I leave the estate and holdings, to my loyal son Eric, the family company, and, he paused. All eyes shifted to Ava, the woman sitting quietly at the edge of the room in a plain blue dress. To Ava, nothing. A gasp burst from one corner. Ava blinked, stunned. Her face flushed as whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone chuckled. Another sneered. She thought she belonged here. Ava stood slowly, lips trembling, eyes glistening. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was erasure. The lawyer's voice faltered as he turned pale, fumbling through the final pages. "Wait," he whispered, rereading. Something was wrong. Ava turned toward the door, but not before locking eyes with Lena, who avoided her gaze. This was no mistake. This was planned humiliation. Outside the estate's grand hall, Ava stood in the blinding daylight, her chest rising sharply as she tried to steady her breath. Every step she'd taken into that room had been laced with silent hope. Hope that she'd finally be acknowledged, finally seen. But inside those walls, they had erased her with a single sentence. A gust of summer wind blew through the tall hedges, rustling her dress. Her hands, trembling, clutched the strap of her worn leather bag. She glanced back at the doors. No one followed. No one spoke for her. Not even Lena. Ava whispered to herself, "What did I even expect?" Her voice cracked. The sun burned overhead, indifferent. But something in the lawyer's panic, that last-second stammer, he had seen something. She wasn't sure what, but it wasn't over. The humiliation cut deep, but deeper still was the sense that this story had only just begun. Back inside, the guests began to scatter, murmuring among themselves. The lawyer remained frozen in his seat, one finger pressed to a line on the will. Judith swept past him, trailing perfume and judgment. "The will was clear," she said to no one in particular, voice smooth and poisonous. Lena hesitated by the door, one foot out, eyes fixed on the document. Eric leaned over the lawyer's shoulder, brow furrowed. "You sure you read that right?" he muttered. The lawyer didn't answer. A page had been folded unnaturally, the crease new. He carefully unfolded it, eyes scanning. His face drained of color. This wasn't here before," he whispered. Lena took a step closer. "What do you mean?" The lawyer looked up, voice barely audible. "There's an addendum. It changes everything." Outside, Ava paused. Her gut twisted. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She turned back. The lawyer's fingers trembled as he carefully laid the new page flat. The words were unmistakable. A handwritten addendum, signed and dated, bearing the patriarch's initials. "In the event of my death," it began, "all assets not otherwise designated shall go to Ava Monroe, my daughter." The room seemed to contract. Eric's fists clenched. Judith spun around, eyes wild. "This is a forgery," she barked. Lena stepped forward, voice low. "It's not. I saw him write it. 2 weeks before he died." The confession fell like a stone. The room erupted, voices overlapping, outrage spilling into accusation. The lawyer stood, shaky but sure. "This addendum is legally binding." Ava stepped back into the room just as Judith hissed, "She doesn't belong here." Ava's voice, though soft, cut through it all. "I never wanted anything but the truth." But now, the truth meant power. The silence that followed Ava's words was thick, broken only by the lawyer's trembling breath. Lena took another step toward her, face conflicted. "I should have told you," she said quietly. Ava didn't respond. Judith stormed forward, finger pointing. "This is theft. That man was senile. He didn't even know what he was writing." The lawyer stood his ground. His signature was witnessed. "It's valid." Ava looked around, at faces once smug now stunned, at Lena's guilt, at the lawyer's shaking hands. Then she spoke, calm and final. If this is true, then I am the rightful heir. Her voice held no pride, only clarity. Eric muttered something under his breath and walked out. Judith turned her rage to Lena. You knew? Lena nodded once. Yes. And with that, the spell was broken. Ava had been humiliated, until they realized she owned it all. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Ava sat at her kitchen table, fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Her eyes were locked on an old photograph, faded at the corners, creased through the middle. A little girl with pigtails stood beside a woman in scrubs, both smiling despite the blur of time. The woman who raised her. Not the one from the will. Ava whispered, You always told me I was enough. Her voice cracked. She had grown up with scraps of stories, half-truths, and an aching gap in her past. He left me everything, she said, voice low. But why did he leave me at all? The apartment walls, covered in modest artwork and stacks of used books, seemed to lean in. This wasn't just about money. It was about identity. Ava wasn't a woman who chased wealth, but now it had chased her, and with it, the ghosts of a father she never knew. The next morning, Ava stood at the chalkboard in her classroom, her words trailing off as her mind wandered. The children's voices blurred. Miss Monroe? One of them asked, concerned. She smiled quickly, shaking off the fog. Sorry, kids. Let's continue. But inside her thoughts churned. The world saw her as a simple woman, a kind teacher with no ambitions beyond the classroom. That simplicity had once been a shield. Now it felt like a disguise. At recess, she sat alone on the bench, watching children play as her phone buzzed. A message from Lena. We need to talk. Tonight. Ava stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Did she want to know more? Or had the will simply cracked open a door better left closed? Either way, she knew she couldn't ignore it. The truth had found her. And this time, she wouldn't look away. That evening, Ava met Lena at a quiet cafe nestled between closed bookshops and flickering street lamps. The sky had turned violet, and the air held a pre-storm tension. Lena arrived late, visibly restless. She sat without a word, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her coat. I didn't know how to tell you, Lena said finally. Ava watched her, calm but piercing. Start from the beginning. Lena sighed, eyes glassy. Your father, he always cared, but he was afraid. Of his wife, of the scandal. You were a secret that got out too late. Ava's chest tightened. So he just abandoned me? He wanted to do more, Lena said. But Judith made it clear. If he claimed you, she'd destroy everything. Ava leaned back, the pieces fitting like a cruel puzzle. And you? You stayed close to me all these years. Why? Lena looked away. Because I couldn't live with the lie. Later that night, Ava walked through her neighborhood park alone, wind brushing against her arms. Street lamps flickered above, and the trees whispered secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Her mind replayed Lena's confession over and over. Her father hadn't been absent by choice, at least, not entirely. And Judith, the woman who had sneered as Ava stood in silence, had been the architect of it all. She sat on a cold bench under an old oak and whispered to herself, I was a threat to their story. Her jaw clenched. Not anymore. For the first time, her grief was beginning to harden into resolve. Ava wasn't just some forgotten daughter anymore. She was the one left standing. And if they thought she'd take the money and disappear, they didn't know her at all. The next morning, Ava stood at her bathroom mirror, staring into her own reflection. There were lines beneath her eyes she hadn't noticed before. But they didn't make her look tired, they made her look real. Strong. She brushed her fingers through her hair, steadying herself. In the silence, she rehearsed what she'd say if she confronted Judith again. I'm not your shame. I'm your reckoning. The words sounded strange at first, but they fit. In her small closet, she bypassed her usual soft tones and reached for something sharper, darker. A navy suit she hadn't worn in years. Today, she would meet with the family's estate lawyer on her terms. As she stepped out the door, the morning sun broke through the clouds. Her past had fractured her identity. But now, for the first time, Ava was shaping the future. The lawyer's office was tucked inside a downtown heritage building, all stone arches and ivy-draped windows. Ava sat across from him at a wide oak desk, posture straight, her eyes steady. "There's more to the estate than just the inheritance," the lawyer began cautiously. "Your father kept detailed personal journals, sealed until after his death. He wanted them delivered to his true heir." Ava's fingers tightened on the folder he slid across the desk. "What's in them?" she asked. "Evidence," he said. "Of what?" He hesitated. "Decisions, deals, betrayals. Your father kept secrets that could ruin people." Ava opened the folder. Photocopies of typed notes, receipts, and newspaper clippings. One headline read, "Senator H involved in bribery scheme, case dismissed." Her father had been connected to a political scandal, and someone had made sure it was buried. Ava leaned back, heart racing. The legacy she'd inherited was far darker than she imagined. That night, Ava sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by pages of her father's journal. A storm raged outside, but inside it was quiet. Too quiet. She read one entry aloud. "I paid them to make it disappear. If Judith ever finds out, she'll bury me too." Her hands trembled. Photos, paper clipped to the journal, showed men in suits, hands exchanged over envelopes. One face stood out, a young politician named Wallace Greer. Ava remembered the name from the news, now a respected senator, once accused of fraud, never convicted. She grabbed her laptop, the screen glowing in the dark. Article after article hinted at buried truths. Her father had bought silence. Judith had threatened exposure. And Lena? How much had she known? Ava stared at the words on the page, her mind spinning. The scandal hadn't just destroyed her family. It had shaped the entire life she was forced to live. The next morning, Ava visited a local archive office, requesting newspaper microfilms from over 30 years ago. The clerk eyed her curiously, but she didn't flinch. "Family research," she said simply. As she scrolled through the dusty reels, names and images leapt off the screen. Her father's company, campaign donations, backdoor political favors. But then she saw it, a brief mention of a whistleblower. Anonymous source claims Monroe was silenced, disappeared days later. Ava froze. She scribbled the name, Calvin Deeks. She had never heard it before. Another page revealed the same man had gone missing during the scandal's peak. Her fingers brushed the headline. No leads. Case cold. When? Ava stared at it, her breath shallow. If someone had been willing to disappear a whistleblower, what would they do to silence her? A simple teacher, now holding the evidence no one wanted found. Ava stepped out of the archive building into the harsh afternoon light. Across the street, a black car idled too long. Her instincts screamed. She walked quickly, turning corners, her breath picking up. When she reached her apartment, she found her door slightly ajar. She hadn't left it like that. Inside, her files were scattered, and her laptop screen was cracked. Ava backed out, heart pounding. Someone had been watching, and they knew what she had. She called Lena, voice tight. "Someone's been inside." Silence. Then Lena said, "You need to leave, tonight." Ava didn't ask why. She already knew. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about control. Power. Men. Silence. Ava had cracked open a secret they'd all buried. And now they wanted her buried too. She pulled out her phone and took pictures of every document she had left. If they were coming, she wouldn't go quietly. That night, Ava checked into a small roadside motel under a different name. She sat on the bed, eyes red from exhaustion, hands trembling as she emailed scanned files to a private journalist contact Lena had once trusted. The subject line was simple, read everything. She stared at the screen, finger hovering before hitting send. This was it, the point of no return. If she exposed this, the political fallout could be massive. But if she stayed silent, she would forever be the woman they erased. The decision wasn't easy. It was dangerous. But she wasn't that simple woman anymore. She clicked send. The file vanished into the cloud. Somewhere out there, the truth had found a new path. Ava exhaled slowly, laying back against the thin pillows. The storm outside was nothing compared to what was coming. But for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Lena arrived at the motel just past midnight, drenched from the storm, her hair clinging to her cheeks. Ava opened the door without a word. Inside, tension blanketed the room. Lena dropped her soaked coat and sat. "They know what you have," she said. Ava nodded. "They were in my apartment." Lena exhaled hard, then pulled a flash drive from her purse. "This is everything I kept hidden. Files your father gave me. I never looked until today." Ava took it, hands steady. "Why now?" Lena hesitated. "Because I couldn't live with the lie anymore. I loved him, Ava. But I loved you too, in a different way. And I watched you grow up in the dark." Ava looked at her, voice hollow. "You knew who I was, and you said nothing. I was protecting you," Lena replied. Ava shook her head. "No, you were protecting yourself." The betrayal had a name now, and it sat inches away. Ava plugged in the flash drive, its soft glow flickering to life. Dozens of encrypted files appeared, labeled by dates and names. One folder caught her attention. She clicked. Inside, recordings and scanned letters, all referencing Wallace Greer. One voice memo played softly. Her father's voice grainy but clear. "I paid for silence, but silence rots. Greer knows everything. If I go down, he goes with me." Ava stared at Lena. "You heard these?" Lena nodded once. "Years ago, before he died, he wanted to come clean. Judith threatened him, told him if he gave you anything she'd destroy all of us." Ava's jaw tightened. "She tried, but I'm still here." Lena whispered, "She's not the only one you need to worry about." Ava looked back at the screen. There was more here than just scandal. There was leverage. And leverage could be deadly. The next day, Ava returned to the estate. Judith was in the garden, pruning roses with practiced precision. The moment she saw Ava, her smile vanished. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly. Ava stepped forward, calm and clear. "You silenced him, you buried the truth, but I've dug it back up." Judith scoffed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, don't I?" Ava held up a copy of the whistleblower report, complete with signatures. "You thought burying the past would keep you clean, but it just made you dirty in silence." Judith's face twitched. "You think people care? You think they'll believe a bastard with a file?" Ava didn't flinch. "They'll believe the voice of the man you spent a lifetime controlling." Judith's hand clenched around the shears. "Be careful, Ava. People disappear over less." Ava stared back. "Then let them come. I'm done hiding." Back at the motel, Ava opened her inbox to find an anonymous reply from the journalist she'd contacted. "I believe you. Let's talk." The email was followed by a second, more chilling. "Stop digging. Final warning." Ava stared at the screen. Her hands didn't shake. Not anymore. She forwarded the files to the journalist and copied them to cloud storage. Then she turned to Lena. "I'm going public." Lena looked panicked. "You'll be a target." Ava answered, "So be it. I've been a target my whole life, just didn't know it." Lena reached for her arm. "We could disappear. Start over." Ava shook her off gently. "You disappear when you're afraid. I'm not afraid anymore." As thunder rumbled outside, Ava looked at her reflection in the motel window, her own eyes staring back, unflinching. "They wanted me invisible, but now they'll see me. All of me." That evening, Ava stood at a press drop-off point outside a city building, handing a sealed envelope to a courier. The man checked her name, nodded, and walked off without a word. She watched him disappear into the crowd. Beside her, Lena waited in silence. "It's done," Ava said. "It's out of my hands now. Are you sure?" Lena asked. "Once it hits, there's no going back." Ava nodded slowly. "Good. I don't want to go back." As they turned to leave, Ava spotted a black sedan parked too far from the curb, engine idling. Her pace didn't change. She just reached into her coat and pressed a tiny voice recorder hidden in her pocket. "If anything happens to me," she said calmly, "the files go public." It wasn't just about protecting herself anymore. It was about reclaiming what was stolen. From her name, her past, her future. The reckoning had begun. Ava arrived at the Capitol Annex building under gray skies, her coat drawn tight against the wind. Inside, the hallway echoed as she walked toward a private conference room, an unscheduled meeting with Wallace Greer himself. He was already seated, guarded and still, flanked by a silent aide. Ava placed a thick folder on the table. "You know what this is," she said. Greer raised an eyebrow. "You're bluffing." Ava opened the file, revealing photos, voice transcriptions, financial ledgers. "You buried people to build your career, my father included." Greer leaned back, unshaken. "He made his choices. So have you." Ava's voice cut sharper. "The difference is, mine won't be hidden." Greer smirked. "You're one woman, no one will listen." She met his gaze. "They will now." She slid a flash drive across the table. "This goes wide tomorrow. Unless you want to step down quietly." For the first time, he blinked. Greer stood, slowly buttoning his jacket. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." Ava remained still. "That's where you're wrong. I understand too well." He took a step closer. "You publish this, you'll never work again. Not as a teacher. Not anywhere." Ava's jaw tightened. "I'm not doing this for a career. I'm doing it for truth." Greer's eyes narrowed. "People like us don't fall. We adapt. You won't like the game once it turns on you." She leaned in, steady. "I'm not playing your game. I'm ending it." The aide stepped forward, but Greer raised a hand, dismissing them both. "This won't be the end of it, Ava," she replied, calm as stone. "It's the beginning of the end." As she turned and walked out, her heart pounded, but her spine stayed straight. She wasn't afraid of Greer anymore. She had become what they never expected. Resistance with a name. Back in her apartment for the first time since the break-in, Ava moved through the silence like a ghost reclaiming her home. Broken glass crunched beneath her shoes. The scent of fear still lingered, but she wasn't the same woman who had fled days earlier. She picked up a shattered frame, her mother's photo. She whispered, "I wish you were here." As she reset the room piece by piece, her phone buzzed. Lena again. "Greer's people are moving. Press is circling. Be careful." Ava stood in the center of her living room, surrounded by traces of intrusion, and said aloud, "Let them come." She was done hiding. If they thought threats would push her underground, they misunderstood everything. She wasn't here to win. She was here to be heard. And if the house burned down around her, so be it. At least the world would see the smoke. News broke just before dawn. Greer linked to 30-year cover-up, the headlines screamed. Photos of her father appeared on every screen. The documents had reached the public. Anonymous sources, confirmed reports, verified audio. Ava watched it all unfold from a diner booth, coffee untouched, hands clenched. The waitress refilled her cup and whispered, "You're brave, honorable." Ava gave a quiet smile. Outside, camera crews were already circling her street. Inside, her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. "You did this, and we won't forget." She didn't reply. She had no more words for cowards. Lena messaged seconds later, "They're calling for Greer's resignation." Ava looked out the window at the rising sun. What had started as humiliation had become something bigger. A reckoning, yes, but also a reminder. She hadn't just inherited wealth. She'd inherited truth. and truth demanded a voice. Later that day, Ava returned to the estate, not as a guest, but as its rightful owner. The gates opened slowly as she walked a long driveway alone. She passed the gardens, the stone fountain, the tall oak that had watched generations pass. Judith was waiting at the door, her expression unreadable. Ava stopped on the threshold. "You were never supposed to survive this," Judith said. Ava replied, "But I did." She stepped inside, each footfall echoing power reclaimed. "This place doesn't belong to your family anymore," Ava continued. "It belongs to the truth. And to me." Judith's gaze faltered for the first time. "You'll never be one of us." Ava's voice was low but unshakable. "I was never trying to be." And with that, she closed the door behind her. The house had once erased her. Now it echoed with her presence. The estate's great hall was quiet as Ava moved through it, sunlight filtering in through tall windows, warming the cold marble floors. She ran her fingers along the edges of the dusty frames lining the hallway, portraits of a family that never included her. Until now. Lena entered behind her, holding a box. "From the study. He left it for you." Ava opened the lid carefully. Inside were her father's journals, original copies, and one sealed letter with her name in heavy handwriting. She sat down slowly on a nearby bench. The paper shook in her hands as she opened it. "I'm sorry," it began. "I failed you before you ever knew who I was." Ava's throat tightened. "But I always loved you. I hoped one day, somehow, you'd understand why I couldn't protect you then." Ava folded the letter back up. "I understand," she whispered. "And now, I'll protect what's mine." Ava met with a group of journalists at a private location, off the record. She laid out the timeline, her father's documents, and the truth behind Greer's rise. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about record. What they erased we restore." Cameras were off. Notebooks open. One reporter asked, "Do you think justice will come?" Ava replied, "Justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in memory, and memory shapes legacy." She handed them copies of the key files. "Print it, or don't. But it's not a secret anymore." The reporters exchanged glances, then one nodded. "We'll run it." Ava exhaled, slowly. Not for relief, but for release. The weight of silence had lifted. The story no longer lived in whispers. It lived in headlines, on airwaves, and in the hands of those who could no longer deny her place in it. The news broke worldwide. Senator Wallace Greer resigns amid scandal. Heiress Ava Monroe exposes cover-up pie. Ava stood before her former classroom one final time, empty now, filled only with sunlight and memories. She ran her fingers along the student desks, each one a reminder of the life she had built for herself before she knew her name carried weight. The principal entered quietly. "You sure about this?" he asked. Ava smiled gently. "It's time. You'll be missed." Ava nodded. "I hope so." She left a note on the desk. "Teach the truth, no matter the cost." With one final glance, she walked down the hallway, each step echoing with quiet conviction. She didn't leave because she had to go. She left because a new chapter waited. She had protected other children long enough. Now she would finally protect the girl she used to be. Judith sat alone in the estate's conservatory, sipping cold tea. Reporters hounded the gates, and legal notices had begun to arrive. Her world, her carefully built empire, was crumbling. Ava entered, uninvited. "You should leave," Judith muttered. Ava remained still. "This place was never really yours. You controlled it, but it was built on lies." Judith laughed bitterly. "You think you've won?" Ava answered, "No, I think I survived. There's a difference." Judith looked up, her power drained, face pale. "You destroyed the family name." Ava's voice was soft but firm. "You did that long before I ever walked through that door." Judith said nothing. She simply looked away. Ava turned to leave but paused. "Your era is over, and I'm not here to carry it. I'm here to bury it. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence left in her wake was louder than any argument. That night, Ava walked through the garden alone, her coat drawn close as autumn leaves crunched beneath her boots. The estate behind her glowed dimly, no longer looming, but simply existing. Her breath misted in the cool air as she paused beneath the tall oak tree, the same one she had passed as a child without knowing it bore her bloodline. She looked up into its branches and whispered, "I made it." Her voice was not triumphant. It was grateful. The wind moved softly through the trees, like an answer. She smiled, hand brushing the trunk. This place, once a symbol of pain, now stood as proof of her endurance. Ava turned toward the gate, her steps steady. The world outside was vast, still dangerous, but no longer unknown. She hadn't just inherited land or money. She'd inherited truth, and with it, the strength to build something better. Weeks passed. The world moved on, but Ava didn't rush to catch up. Instead, she spent her mornings walking the estate grounds and her afternoons organizing the foundation she was building in her father's name. Only now, it would serve those left behind like she had been. The Monroe Trust for Forgotten Voices, the sign read on her desk. Children without names. Whistleblowers without protection. People whose stories were erased. Ava had become their steward. Lena visited sometimes, still carrying quiet guilt, but Ava no longer held her hostage to it. "You helped me in the end," Ava said once. "That's what matters now." The past didn't need to be erased, but it no longer held her captive. She had inherited power, yes, but more than that, she'd inherited perspective. And she intended to use both wisely. An open house was held at the estate, once a symbol of division, now a space for community. Guests wandered through restored halls, reading exhibits on political accountability, lost family histories, and the cost of silence. Ava greeted each guest warmly, answering questions with clarity and patience. She no longer flinched at her own story. It was written in every wall, every frame. A teacher from her old school approached, eyes wide. "I didn't know." Ava smiled. "Most people didn't, but it's never too late to learn." That day wasn't just about legacy. It was about turning wounds into windows. The estate had once hidden truth. Now, it displayed it proudly. And Ava, no longer a secret, stood in the center of it all, not as a victim or a scandal, but as a woman who had claimed her voice. Later that evening, as the final guests departed, Ava walked alone through the now quiet halls. In the study, she found one last box, labeled simply, "For her." Inside, another letter from her father. "If you're reading this, you've done more than survive. You've stood tall. I always believed you would." Ava sat in his old chair, the leather worn, the wood familiar. She read every word, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman seeking understanding. The letter ended with, "Make something better with what I failed to fix." Ava whispered, "I will." She looked around the room, no longer haunted by what had been lost, but inspired by what could still be built. Closure didn't come from vengeance. It came from truth carried forward with purpose. Ava no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. She had earned her place. The next morning, Ava stood outside the estate gates, watching as a group of young students arrived for a history tour, some from her old school. Their chatter reminded her of her own childhood, full of questions and silence. One young girl broke from the group and asked, "Are you the lady who owns this place now?" Ava smiled. "I am." The girl nodded, impressed. "It's pretty." Ava crouched beside her. "It wasn't always, but now it's better, because people like you get to ask questions." The girl grinned and ran off. Ava stood, her heart full. She had become what she never had, someone to look up to. And maybe, just maybe, this place could become something more than a monument to secrecy. Maybe it could become a place where stories were told freely and heard. Ava turned back toward the house. It was time to begin again. In the final hour of day, Ava stood on the estate balcony, looking out over the trees that had once surrounded her in silence. The wind was gentle, the sky painted in strokes of orange and gold. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for something to happen. She had acted, spoken, reclaimed. The past had been rewritten, not with fiction, but with courage. "They thought I was a mistake," she said to the open air. "But I was always the truth." Below, the lights of the foundation offices flickered on. Inside, others worked, others healed, others built. Ava stepped back into the room, closing the door gently behind her. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a scandal. She was Ava Monroe, a woman who rose from silence, faced power, and didn't flinch. And now, with peace in her chest and fire still in her heart, she was finally free.